the halachas and the concept of nevuah, of prophecy. The pasuk tells us that the Baruch Hashem, one of the mitzvahs that are mentioned in the parsha is that we're not allowed to go to sorcerers and fortune tellers and things of the occult in order to figure out the future and to know what's going to be and so on. So the Baruch Hashem says, no, but you're curious, you want to know what's going to be, so I can't just let you hanging like that. So the pasuk says, Navi mikirbecha me'achecha kamayni yakim lecha. Moshe says that, in the name of Hashem, that I promise you that throughout your generations, I'm going to give you Nevi'im, I'm going to give you prophets like me, says Moshe Rabbeinu, from amongst you. And this is something that you have already asked for, going back to Har Sinai, that you asked me to ask the Rabbanu Shalom that Hashem should promise you always to have prophets. And Hashem fulfilled your request. And the pasuk goes on to say, Moshe Rabbeinu goes on to the great detail in terms of who the prophet is able to, what proofs would the prophet need to bring to prove that he's a prophet, all the halachas of Nevi'im. Now we know that throughout our period, throughout the Jewish history, from Har Sinai until the end of the Churban Beis HaMikdash, until the end of the first Beis HaMikdash, we had a lot of Nevi'im. In Tanakh, all we have recorded are 48 Nevi'im, right? But the truth is, we have a tradition that we had over 1.5 million Nevi'im in our people's history. 48 of them said prophecies that were necessary for future generations to know about. So those are the only ones recorded in Tanakh. But we had many, many Nevi'im. And you should know, not only were there 1.5 million Nevi'im, but there were yeshivas set up, there were systems of yeshivas set up to produce Nevi'im. So when you have, at the end of the day, 1.5 million Nevi'im, there's countless more people that were in the Navi yeshivas that didn't necessarily make it through to become a Navi. Just no different than a yeshiva nowadays. Not everyone that goes to yeshiva comes out the other end a rabbi, right? So it's the same thing with Nevi'im. You could have, for 100 guys come into yeshiva, one of them comes out to be a Navi, so you can imagine the numbers. So Nevuah was something very, very pervasive in the Jewish people. Not only we have to appreciate the unbelievable loss that we have, that we don't have Nevuah nowadays. Because not only would Nevi'im be able to tell you, the future and things that, that the Jewish people nationally needed to know in terms of security and whatnot, but there's a famous teaching from the Gra that you would go to the Navi. This was a common occurrence. You would go to the Navi and you would ask, Reb Navi, what is my purpose in life? Like, what am I here for? Like, that's something that we all struggle with. Like, what is my purpose? What am I here for? Obviously, we know we have to do day to day, but b'chlal, like, what does the world need me to bring to it? What would the world look like if I wasn't here? And that was something that the roles of the Nevi'im were to fill that. The Navi would tell you that your job in life, your mission in life is X, Y, Z. And for the rest of the person's life, he at least knew what to do. It didn't necessarily make the job easier, but as long as you at least know what you're doing is correct. And so the loss of Nevuah, it's even more than that. The truth is not just is the information that the Navi would say like unbelievably important to know, but just having Nevi'im in the world changed everything. Like we have many stories in Tanakh where people would simply walk by a Navi, and just being within the environment of Nevi'im, they themselves will be changed. For example, there's one of the most famous Navi probably of all time, outside of Moshe Rabbeinu, is Eliyahu, right? Eliyahu Hanavi. So Eliyahu Hanavi had who was his great student? Elisha, right? Elisha. So how did Elisha become a Navi? So it's interesting. The pasuk, it's a whole story in Sefer Malachim that Eliyahu Hanavi was looking for this neshama called Elisha, and he passed by Elisha's house. And Elisha at the time was not a Navi; he was far from it. He was a farmer in his father's, farm, and he was working with the cattle to plow. And the pasuk says that when Eliyahu Hanavi passed by him, Eliyahu Hanavi's coat, like as he would walk by, touched Elisha. And just touching the coat of Eliyahu Hanavi, without Eliyahu Hanavi saying anything, doing anything, looking at him, just touching the coat of Eliyahu Hanavi changed Elisha for life. In that moment, he drops the plow and commits the rest of his life to be a student to Eliyahu Hanavi and becomes Elisha the prophet. So we're talking about people that not just knew information that would be necessary to know. We're talking about just their very existence and being in an environment in which to see someone that spoke to God. That itself through just osmosis, it changed the entire atmosphere around them. For example, another story in Navi we have is when Shaul HaMelech, King Saul, was trying to kill David. So at some point he found out where David was hiding, and so he sent soldiers to go kill him. Now think of it for a second. The soldiers that are being sent to kill David HaMelech are probably not the frummest of people in the world, right? They're trying to kill David. But they're sent by the king to go do that. The pasuk says that Shmuel Hanavi knew what was going on and preempted the whole thing. He sent a number of his students, prophets themselves, Nevi'im themselves, to go just hang out in the vicinity where these soldiers were coming. And the pasuk says that when these soldiers passed by the place that these students of Shmuel Hanavi were just hanging out, these soldiers became changed. They themselves became Nevi'im, and they dropped. Obviously, they quit their job of killing David. And Shaul did this a few times, and it kept on backfiring. They kept on becoming Nevi'im, and that was it. Just being in the environment of people like that. So we have to think about what can, like, we have to first appreciate the loss that we don't have Nevi'im nowadays. That's Aleph. And Beis, we have to be mechazik ourselves with emunah, with belief that Nevuah will come back. Not only we believe that when Mashiach comes, Nevuah will come back. Not only will it come back the way it was. The pasuk in Yoel, there's a number of psukim in Tanakh that promise us that when Nevuah comes back, it's going to come back in much greater number and much greater intensity. The pasuk says, for example, Bachurechem, that even young men, to become a Navi back in the day, it took a lifetime of training. Over 1.5 million people got there, but it took a lifetime of training. The pasuk says when Mashiach comes, young children will become Nevi'im. So it's going to be all pervasive. And so we have to figure out what is going on in the world today. It sounds like a funny question, but what's going on in the world today that is paving the way for Nevuah to come back? That's the question. Because you could just say, okay, Mashiach will come and just Hashem will snap his fingers and Zeh, Nevuah comes back without any effort. But that's not usually how the Hashem runs the world. Hashem runs the world usually in a way where things are methodical and slow and things move in a certain path. And so the question is, how is Hashem running the world nowadays in a way that's going to lead to the return of Nevuah? Okay. So to answer that question, we have to first investigate why Nevuah ended. Right? What made Nevuah stop? And then if we could figure out what made Nevuah stop, maybe we could figure out how maybe that cause is, maybe we could figure out a reason of how to bring it back.
When did Nevuah end?
So when did Nevuah end? So it's like this. You might think that Nevuah just, okay, Yiriyah Sadaris, right? People just weren't holding, so just... The problem is, Nevuah didn't trickle out. Nevuah fell off a cliff. At the end of the first Beis HaMikdash, but right before the destruction, you had plenty of Nevi'im. Right after destruction, no Nevi'im. So it seems that it was not a natural phenomenon where it just slowly but surely trickled out and people forgot learning how to become Nevi'im and the training fell apart. Something happened that just put a stop to it in its tracks. And again, it didn't show any sign of weakening at all. So what is that? What happened by the first Beis HaMikdash? So there's a teaching from the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon writes in a pirush that he wrote to sort of a medrash called Seder Olam. Seder Olam is a sefer, it's like a history sefer type of thing. And so the Gra wrote a commentary to it. So that sefer, that history book that the Gra was writing a commentary to, it takes you to the end of the first Beis HaMikdash. And this is what that sefer writes at the end of the first Beis HaMikdash. It says, Ad Kan Hayu Nevi'im. Until the first Beis HaMikdash, that was when you had the period of Nevi'im. You had, it was the time period of Nevuah. But after that point, Nevuah ended. Why? So says the Gra like this. The Gra says that the reason why it ended, it's related to a different event that took place at that time. It wasn't so much the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, but it was connected to a different event. The Gemara tells us in Yuma, and in a few places, that the Chachamim at the time of the Churban Beis HaMikdash got together and made the following decision. They said like this: there was a certain sin which the Jewish people were struggling with from the very, very beginning, which ultimately led to the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash, and that was idolatry. Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah was something we were struggling with for a very long time. And we were never really able to get a handle on it, to really overcome that test. So the Chacham, says the Gemara, the Chachamim that just saw the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, they decided, well, this took place because we had a problem with idolatry. So they got together, they convened, the Chacham of the generation convened and decided, we're getting rid of the Yetzer Hara for idolatry, the temptation for it. You still have idolatry in the world, but in terms of it being like something that people lusts over, that there's a taiva for it, that it doesn't exist anymore. The Chachamim somehow, in some way, took away that Yetzer Hara. So now there's temptations for other things, but there's no temptation for idolatry. Says the Gra, at that moment, when they took away the temptation for idolatry, at that moment, prophecy was also lost. That's the Gra. The Gra makes that connection. You lose idolatry, you lose prophecy. What does one do with the other? So there's a number of ways to explain this. For example, one simple way is Rav Leo Dessler and Rav Tzaddik Hakayan. They explain the following way, which is that Hashem has a basic rule that He runs the world with, which is that He needs to maintain free will, right? That's why we're here, to choose good over evil. And therefore Hashem always has to keep good and evil sort of in a balance. And so Hashem looks down and He sees, well, listen, the Chachamim just got rid of a huge Yetzer Hara called Avodah Zarah. Well, now the scales of free will are uneven, because now you have everything was even until now, but now you just took away. So to even things out, what Hashem had to do is, okay, you took away Avodah Zarah, so what I'm going to do is take away prophecy. And that maintains the balance of good and evil in the world. That's Rav Leo Dessler and others. There's a teaching from Rav Kook. Rav Kook explained this teaching from the Gra in a very interesting way. Rav Kook said like this. Rav Kook said that we have to understand, what is the driving force behind that old temptation, that old Yetzer Hara for Avodah Zarah? What was that? Like, what was that? We don't have to explain what's the Yetzer Hara for women or food or saying Lashon Hara. I think we all get that. But what was the Yetzer Hara for Avodah? What was that? So said Rav Kook like this: what it was a very natural desire of the human being to experience something that's beyond 3 dimensions. Like children, for example. Children have a very, very strong sense of imagination, right? Children's imagination is very, very strong. As you get older, so the imagination becomes a little bit less dominant, and you become more of an intellectual person, hopefully, right? That's what it means to be an adult, right? Hopefully. But said Rav Kook, the entire humanity, until that moment where Chazal changed things, until that humanity, all of humanity at that time were childlike. What does it mean to be a child? It means that they were not satisfied. Humanity was not satisfied with, okay, that's a cup, this is a table, and 2 + 2 is 4. I want more than that. I want to imagine. I want to see things. I want to experience. At that time, think about it. All of culture at that time was revolving around the spiritual things, the occult, witchcraft, and black magic, and on the opposite side, prophecy. The fixation of humanity was not on the logical, logistical 3 dimensions of planet Earth. It was, they wanted to experience something more than this place. That was the taiva for Avodah Zarah. The taiva for Avodah Zarah was this thirst inside the human being that wants to imagine, that wants to experience things that are not so tangible, that wants to break out of the little box of logic and of, the cerebral 3-dimension space of this world. And so, says Rav Kook, that same demand, that same thirst, that same energy of wanting to experience something imaginative, in impurity, in unholiness, that would bring a person to idolatry. What was Avodah Zarah? Avodah Zarah was not just bowing down to a tree. Avodah Zarah was that by bowing down to the tree, you were somehow channeling spiritual energy, and you experienced things. You saw visions. You saw unbelievable things. You became a spiritual person. It was all impure. It was all unholy, but it was something real. It wasn't just the act, bowing down to a stone. It was much deeper than that. They felt an energy in the stone that they were trying to access by serving it. And so that same need, that same thirst of the human being, of humanity at the time, that in a negative way would bring you to Avodah Zarah, in a positive way would bring the Jewish people to what? To Nevuah. Because what is Nevuah? Nevuah is also, I am not satisfied. What drives a person to become a Navi? What made a person decide to go to Navi Yeshiva and not regular Yeshiva? Well, the answer is because that person made a decision, and it was part of their DNA, that I don't want to just serve God. I want to know who God is. I want to experience God. I want to feel, I don't just want to put on tefillin, I want to feel what is happening in heaven and in my soul when I put on tefillin. It's a little bit of a childlike experience of wanting to, of having a healthy imagination, of having a healthy dosage of a part of you that that wants to experience crazy stuff. And so crazy stuff in unholiness means avodah zarah, and in holiness, in kedusha, it means prophecy. So said Rav Kook, when the Chachamim got rid of avodah zarah, you know what they did? It wasn't just like a magic trick. They changed the psychology of humanity at the time. What they did was they played with the spiritual DNA of humanity, and at that moment, everything shifted. Instead of the focus of society being on the occult, spirituality, and mysticism, what Chazal did was that they took the imagination of humanity and put it in the closet, and ever since then, the guiding force of society and of the human being is what? Is the intellect. And so it's an amazing thing. At that same moment, when Nevuah ends by the Jewish people, look at the rest of the world. The same thing. No longer is there an obsession with the occult and witchcraft. Now you have Greek philosophy and the Romans, technological advancements. You now have the world of logic. Where'd that come from? Just a few years before, you had Egypt, the Egyptian culture, for example, which is all about the occult and mysticism and death after life after death, all that stuff, right? Unbelievably advanced in terms of witchcraft and the occult. But then a few years later, all of the entire planet forgets about that stuff, and everyone is now focused on that which is logic, that which you can touch with your fingers. What happened? Well, the answer is Chazal came and changed something. Chazal took away the Yetzer Hara for avodah zarah, meaning they refocused humanity, they focused humanity out away from the spiritual to the practical. And what that does is it takes away the taiva for avodah zarah, but it also takes away the drive for prophecy. That's Rav Kook. And now that we have established that it's become clarified, what is the root of why avodah zarah fell off the cliff? Like, what happened to it? So Rav Kook goes on to say the following thing. He says that you're going to see, Rav Kook wrote this in the early 1900s. He says, you're already seeing, he said, but you're going to see even more. That before Mashiach comes, the society and the human being are going to shift back to the way they were. Again, during the period of Nevuah, the focus, the driving force of humanity and of society was mystical, spiritual, imaginative. The Chacham change that with the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash, and now the focus is practical, pragmatic, logical. Rav Kook said, however, before Mashiach comes, you're going to see slowly but surely that imagination is going to be let out of its cage. And you're going to see how society is going to refocus itself and is going to drive itself with all the technological and logical advancements. It's going to refocus itself on achieving that which is more imaginative. And Rav Kook said, you're going to see, even nowadays, who do people look up to nowadays? It's not like the scientists and all that. Even, let's put it this way, even science and technology, what's driving it? Not the pursuit of truth. It's like, have a better phone, you know what I mean? And have better gaming, and let's go to Mars because maybe there'll be Martians there. You know what I'm saying? It's like children. You know what I'm saying? Like children pretend that they're astronauts going to different planets and experiencing alien life, and you have the same people in NASA doing the same thing just with much more sophisticated technology, actually trying to do it. But why are they doing it? There's some pursuit of truth, but it's also just cool. That's what's driving society now. What is cool and what's awesome? It's like that's something new. Why is it that people are? Why is it that like the phone and stuff like that is so addictive? There's a lot of aspects to it, but one aspect of it is because it taps into the imagination. It's not real, and that's exactly why it's so addictive. So you would think if you took a time machine back 300 years ago, and you tell people like, by the way, in 300 years, people are going to get so addicted to stuff that's absolutely not real. People are like, what are you talking? Like, was it Mishagayim? Like, why would you want to become obsessed with things that are pashut not real? You know, like it doesn't make any sense. Well, the answer is, yeah. 300 years ago, the driving force of society was logic, and this doesn't make sense. But now, what's the driving force of society? Not logic at all. The driving force of society is shifting to the imagination. And because it's the imagination, things that are more imaginative, things that tap into that, are the driving force. That's what people want. And so why is Hashem doing that? Because, by the way, when this transition happens, as it is, that means we have a hard time learning Gemara. We have a hard time being disciplined people, because discipline and methodical learning of Gemara and so on, that's very logical. And that's very post-Nevuah. But now when you have that shift reverting back, paving the way for Nevuah to reemerge, so it comes with a lot of uneasiness, and a lot of chaos, and a lot of chutzpah, and a lot of imbalance between the older generation and the younger generation. They're not speaking to each other, because what's driving the older generation is the brain. What's driving the younger generation is the imagination, and those are very, very different goals, very different ways of thinking, different ways of experiencing life. But the reason why Hashem is doing that is if we're able to handle the turmoil. And this is, by the way, the deeper explanation of what Chazal talk about, the upheaval and the turmoil of the end of time, before Mashiach comes. It's not, don't worry about any what's the word they have by the Christians, Armageddons. Don't worry about any of that stuff. Don't worry about any of that stuff. That's not what Chazal are talking about. That's not what Tanakh are talking about. They're talking about the spiritual upheaval of nowadays, where people are looking for something deeper, both in Yiddishkeit and in the secular world, and this world with its three-dimensional space is unable to give it to them. And that creates a very, very, that creates a very deep uneasiness and a deep level of dissatisfaction with life. And so people are more depressed now. People are therefore more addicted to all sorts of things that get them to escape life. It's all coming from this single truth, which is the driving force is no longer the brain, it's the imagination. But why is Hashem doing that? The reason why Hashem is doing that is because the same people that are addicted to their phones nowadays, the same people that are addicted to all sorts of stuff nowadays just to escape life and to try to experience something that's a little bit not so practical, it's those same people in a couple of years, Be'ez Hashem, they'll be mamish neviim. Because that's what's going on. It's the driving force of the imagination is becoming more dominant. And again, we have to figure it out. We have to learn how to deal with it in a productive and a healthy way, but that's what's happening. And so this is part of what the Rebbeinu Shalom wants us to see nowadays, is to see how he's running the world in a way where things will come back to the way they were. And as the prophet, as the Psukim promise us, that when Mashiach comes, not only will Nevuah come back, it'll come back kiflei kiflayim. Bechurim, children will be able to prophesy. Which children? The same ones that were walking around bumping into poles because they're looking at their phone. It's the same people, because that's exactly what's driving them. They don't want to see poles, they want to see something cool and something different. And they think they're going to find it on their phone. The truth is where they're going to find it in depth, in a real way, in a truly satisfying way, is in a deep Yiddishkeit. And I don't mean a Yiddishkeit of just going through the motions, a deep, spiritual, personalized, exciting Yiddishkeit. That's where the imagination will truly be able to be satisfied. And then you'll have those same people that they'll eventually, when they discover that, they'll say, that's what I've been looking for. That's what I've been looking for. And then those people will become the greatest Nevi'im to ever exist. So Hashem Shal, we should be Zaycha to be able to get through this transition as smoothly and as simply as possible, and to always obviously take Eitzah, take guidance from the older generation that are governed by the mind, to be able to make sure that we're not bumping into poles, right? But to be able to also appreciate the gift that Hashem has given the younger generation, and to allow that imagination to be fully manifest in a productive, healthy way that will eventually lead to the return of Nevuah, B'bias Gol Tzedek Meher V'Yimenu. Amen.
Thank you, Hashem. Thank you, Hashem. Thank you, Hashem. Thank you, Hashem.